Woo! Hello, we're live. Start countdown.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to Mindful Morning Minutes. Thank you guys so much for joining us here today. We have an awesome show that Julie's going to introduce.
Yes, good morning. It's another beautiful day. We're glad that you're here with us for some positivity and mindfulness. Today, we are moving into a month on love. Yes, and all kinds of love.
Ooh.
So those of you out there in relationships, just know that we'll be here supporting that. And if there's any room for improvement, then we'll support you in finding what you're seeking there. If you're looking for love, we're here for you as well. And as we talk about often, because it is so important, if you simply need a little improvement in your relationship with yourself, in your self-love, self-care category, we're doing that too. So we're moving in to this awesome few weeks of love in all ways, shapes, and forms. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about something very important that is the number one reason in any relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, family, friends, work relationships, where things can get off track. And that is communication. So communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, is the number one thing that tends to cause problems in any or all relationships. So we are going to dive in to those things today, and we're excited about that. Also, for those of you who are realizing what day it is, we are 1 month out. 1 month from our Honor Your Body Challenge. And we are excited. We hope you are too. We hope you're gathering your friends, anybody that you know that could use some positivity around their body, around honoring themselves, their self-care, improving their life, and really starting to listen to our bodies and have that mind-body connection. So we are diving into that 1 month from now. We are very excited. We have a lot of surprises coming for you within this challenge. So keep watching for those posts and gathering anyone you think that could benefit or might just be fun to do this with. So bring those people in and let's start talking a little bit about this important part of relationships today.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as February is the season of love, we wanted to, bring some of the best tips here and because it's that kind of time of the year with, like Julie was saying, whether or not you're even if you're in a relationship with someone else or just a relationship with yourself, this research will be useful for you. So we wanted to bring something that will just help your ability to communicate. And so we looked at the work of Dr. John Gottman. He's an American psychologist who's centered his life's work around relationships, what makes them work, what predictors are there for relationships that don't work, right? Because he's been doing this research since the 70s. So there's just tons of data. And it turns out that there are certain predictors that we know that we can almost mathematically be like, oh, if people do these things, it's just going to lead to unhappiness. And if people do these things, it leads to happiness. And so they're really able to map out the best ways to communicate within relationships. And so, they actually, so it's really interesting because they would just record. They would be like, all right, so here's the situation. He's just shown up late to, late without calling. What do you do? Right. And so they would analyze the way that couples handled certain situations. And they got so good at it that within 3 minutes of watching communication, they could be like, okay, this one will last, this one won't, with really great certainty. And so it's pretty amazing that it's you can tell within just a few minutes the way people interact with each other, what are the things they need to work on, what are the things they don't. And that's how important this verbal and nonverbal communication is in the context of relationship, is that you can know within a few minutes, even if the argument lasts an hour, it's really just a 3-minute chunk will tell you everything. So as we, so you're like, well, really 3 minutes? That's it. So it turns out that there are a few key predictors when it comes to relationships and longevity and communication habits. And they called this the magic ratio of 5-to-1. So the ratio of 5-to-1 is the predictor of relationship happiness, basically. And so it's have you ever have you ever counted? It's like kind of a weird question to think about. Have you ever counted like how many positive to negative interactions you have with your partner? And that may sound like a really odd thing to track, but it's actually a key component to a happy, stable relationship is the number of positive to negative interactions. So in conflict conversations of successful couples, they basically have 5 seconds of either positive or neutral emotional states for every 1 second of negative emotional state within a conflict conversation. So we can think of that basically for every one negative interaction you have with your partner, you need at least 5 positive ones. And that's kind of interesting, right? You need those, like, they know that like if the ratio is that 5 positive to 1 negative, then you're going to be in a happy relationship. So each time you nag, just give 5 happy things to do. Like, so, or something like that. You can think about it that way. I think it's kind of funny, but yeah. And then also outside of conflict discussions, really successful couples tend to have a ratio of 20-1 when it comes to positive to negative just interactions. So like think about every time you have some sort of negative interaction, really balance it out with flooding positives in, afterwards, because being aware of this is just really helpful, right? Because if you notice like, oh wow, that was something really negative that I said to my partner, let me balance it out with some positive things, like, here, like, oh, I love the way you do this. Oh, this was so good. Oh, it was so thoughtful that you did this. And getting into the habit of pointing out the positives also just puts you in the habit of pointing out more positives. And so that's going to lead to more happiness in your relationship as well. So we're going to give you guys some examples of what's going to kind of result in negative emotional states. And that starts with what they call the 4 horsemen of communication style. It's like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yes. And if you're sitting there thinking about this, think about this not only in possibly a romantic relationship, but even in relationship with yourself, right? How many times are we sitting there saying negative things to ourselves? And if every time you said something to yourself, just even in your mind of, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not good enough for that, or that will never happen, and then you had to flood yourself with these 5 positive things, how powerful would that be? So let's look at some of the negatives, and this will help you realize what possibly you're doing in your relationship, and you might even be doing with yourself, even if it's unconscious. So number 1 being criticism, right? Yes. Who on here can say they've ever criticized someone or themselves? And if you can't say it, then you must be a saint. So criticizing your partner is very different than offering a critique or voicing a complaint, because criticism is actually an attack on your partner and their core character, like who they are. So a complaint would look like, I was really scared when you were running late and you didn't call me. I thought we talked about that, and I thought we agreed if you were going to run late that you would just call or text me and let me know. That's a complaint. A criticism would be something along the lines of, you never think about your behavior or how you're affecting other people. You never think about others, and you certainly never think of me. So those are all never, never, never. And when you use this kind of language, the always or the never, it's not realistic, because nobody is always anything or never anything. So that's just hurtful.
And the next of the 4 horsemen is defensiveness. And defensiveness is typically a response to criticism. So if you're criticized, you tend to get defensive. And so that also is like in couples, when like one person is being critical or criticizing them, and then the other partner tends to get defensive. So they feel, and this happens when you feel unjustly accused. Right? We've all like experienced having to be defensive over something, like, oh, well, I didn't do that. Like, what do you mean? Like, so it's, you start to get excuses or like play a victim. And that's like that behavior is so that the partner will back off, like, that hurt victim. But it's another, negative thing in interactions, because it shows that you're not able to actually communicate the idea or what you were feeling or what's going on.
Absolutely. And another one, the third one here, is contempt. So when we treat others with disrespect or mock them in some way, like sarcasm or ridiculing them, calling them names, mimicking them, and this one, especially with body language, the simple things that we may intentionally or unintentionally do of, rolling our eyes or scoffing. And what the negative part of contempt is that really it's targeting and it's making that person feel despised and worthless. And that never feels good.
And there's one common response to contempt, and that's stonewalling. And so this usually is a response to the contempt. So stonewalling is when the listener kind of just withdraws, like they go in, they shut down, they will close off the interaction. It's like either just simply not responding to their partner, or instead of like confronting the issue when they feel like contempt from their partner, they'll just like turn away from the situation, or start acting busy, or just completely disengage, or engage in some sort of obsessive compulsive behavior, like looking at their phone. Like, you might be talking, and it's like if they feel that contempt, it's just like, okay, and that's also not helpful, because it also closes off the ability to have a complete interaction or to find some sort of common ground when there's an issue. And so that's why, and so these four horsemen really are the like four predictors of like just unhappiness in relationships. So when they did the analyzed people in their situations when they're communicating, when they saw any of those four, any variation of those, it tends to be like, okay, these ones don't last. And they followed people from the 70s to now, so they know the longevity of relationships. They're like, okay, well, these ones, like these relationships, this happened like this percentage of the time in their conflicts, and it didn't work out, after X amount of time, because eventually the partners will like, okay, well, that was horrible. Like they will drift apart because they're not able to have open communication. And so some of the other ways that that these negative interactions show up, the negative emotional states, is like lashing out at your partner when you feel flooded instead of taking a timeout. Right? And this can happen if you're having any sort of argument. You can like it seems hard, but the easiest thing you can do is actually, if you're like overly stimulated, is to just take a timeout. And this is what they say in all communication things. If you can't, basically, because if you just lash out, right, and you start like, wow, blah, 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 and you yell at someone, it's like it's going to shut both things out, and you're also not in a headspace where you're able to even have a conversation. And so being able to remove yourself and create that boundary within the relationship is actually really good. Like, hey, I really appreciate that we're having this conversation right now, but I'm going to act in a way that isn't my best self. I'm overly stimulated. I don't want to yell at you. Or I don't want to get into a yelling or anything crazy. Let's give me a moment, and you step out, and in that time, both partners can actually calm down. And it's better than to come back to an argument than to just have it there in the moment when everyone's feeling the emotions like really strong, because the emotions are what's going to really get us into trouble. We're like, you were doing this and you were doing this. Right? You want to be able to step back and just say like, okay, like I need this moment to become calm again, basically.
Yes, and it's important, I think, when you're looking at these things, to think about your house, your household, your family growing up as a child, and what was happening then. What was the norm? Certain cultures are very fiery, right? So in their homes, there might have been a lot of yelling for communication. And you don't even realize sometimes that that's how you grew up. And you might go to that. Like every time you get upset, you might go to raising your voice during a conflict, because that's how you grew up. It's like you had to raise your voice to be heard. And especially as a child, sometimes we can feel like that and then get stuck in that behavior and bringing that into all of our other relationships. So just realizing that it's possible to have conflict without yelling, without raising your voice, and thinking about any other patterns that might be coming up, like neglecting to do something that you told your partner you would do. So kind of that passive aggressive punishment, if you will, of, you said you would do this thing, but now you're not going to do it because they did this thing. And then it becomes, this passive aggressive. Did you have that in your house growing up? And if so, just the awareness of that and identifying that can help you to stop doing these behaviors in your current relationship and being invalidating. So, it's so important. As we all know, it feels good when someone validates us. So doing the opposite of that, it just comes from a hurtful place, and it's not supportive of our partners or ourselves. And, rejecting connection, if your partner is trying to make an attempt to reconnect or to repair, and then staying in the rejection, it's like, sure, you could do that, but who are you really punishing? Are you punishing them, or are you just prolonging everyone's upset and anger and misery? So it's as hurtful to you as it is to them. So tuning into that, if that was a pattern from childhood, and even not listening to your partner when they're speaking. Sometimes if we grew up in a heated household where people are yelling to be heard, and there's a lot of that happening, then we might be conditioned to not really listen, because you're just thinking about your point, winning the conversation or the next thing you need to say, and not actually taking time to listen to your partner during the conflict. And it never feels good to not be heard. So just realizing that, obviously, if you're more on that side of the role, if you're yelling to be heard, then you're wanting to be heard, and so is your partner. And just forgetting milestones, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, things that are important to your partner, whether it's events or certain things that they're doing, forgetting those or not noticing or being aware of those things can definitely be a negative thing in a relationship. So taking that time, even if you put it in your calendar, doing something so that you can acknowledge those things would be a more positive way.
And so going back to the main point of this, so if any of those show up, you basically have to balance it out with 5 positive interactions. So it's like for every one of those negative ones, you want 5 positive. And that's the way to a happy, healthy relationship. That really is. And it's might sound at first like, oh, wow. Like if you were to start tracking it, like, oh, my ratio isn't all that great. Well, that's good, because now now you're able to be like, okay, well, how do I create now these positive interactions? And we're going to tell you right now. So there's very simple ways to actually create positive interactions, right? And one of those is to share appreciation. And so that's like, taking a moment to tell your partner 3 things that you appreciate about them every day. And if your partner is yourself, definitely do this one. Please do this one. Take that time to appreciate yourself. Tell yourself some things that you appreciate that you've done. Right? Because this is about creating good relationships. And if you have that good relationship with yourself, you'll also have better relationships with others. Because if you love yourself, it's easier to love others. And so it's one of those things that goes hand in hand. Make sure that you're giving yourself that love. Another thing is to show affection often. So an affection can really be physical and verbal, or like holding hands, or just saying I love you, or that's just showing affection. And those things, that's a positive interaction. So that's one way of helping balance the scales. Also being an active listener. So when your partner's talking to you, take that moment to actually listen, understand, and not just respond with whatever, ask questions. And one of the ways to really show people that you're actually actively listening is when you kind of summarize what they said back to them and make eye contact, and then give your input or ask questions about it. And that's really kind of one of those things about conversation we don't really think about, but that shows oh, wow, okay, you did listen. It's like, oh, okay, so what you're saying is this. I really liked the way blah, 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 blah. And that's one of those things about active listening, because oftentimes, like Julie was saying, we're so busy thinking of what's the next thing I'm going to say sometimes, that it's we forget that, conversation isn't just what am I going to say? And then the conversation, what am I going to say? Right. Each conversation is a conversation. It's a back and forth.
Yes. And just small things, thinking of the small things you can do, like little acts of love or little acts of service for your partner, something that they normally do, but maybe you could step in and you could do it just to take their stress away, or just to show them that you were thinking about them. Or if they're in a stressful situation at work and they're really busy, taking on some of those things to alleviate their stress, showing your partner that you're thinking of them by doing, something sweet, whether it's writing them a little note or, making something for them or whatever, just little sweet things that show your partner that you're thinking about them. It can even be a simple text during the day. Just, I'm thinking about you, something that you did that I'm still thinking about or makes me laugh or something like that. Showing validation is huge. As we were talking about in the negatives, we all want to be validated, and so do our partners. So whether it's for yourself, giving that validation, or for your partner, phrases when they're talking to you, saying things like, that makes sense, or wow, I can understand why you would feel that way. I didn't even realize that was happening. Those statements of validating and showing them that you are listening, that what they're saying is heard, understood, and important. And having fun together. This one, it can't be forgotten, right? Life can get so busy, but we should still be having fun. I guarantee if you are in a relationship, at the beginning of the relationship, everything was really fun, right? And then over time, that can trickle away and get swept up in the busyness of life, and bringing that back with things like dately, like doing like a date night, even if it's just once a week or even once a month, if that's all you have time for, bringing that in, or having one moment of connection, whether it's in the morning, sharing coffee together, or in the evening, taking a walk, or sharing a few moments before bed to unload your day or say something positive, and responding positively to bids for connection. So having the awareness when your partner is trying to connect with you. And I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're so busy and we miss those signs and those signals. So if your partner is asking you how your day was, take a moment to say more than fine or good or it was okay. Share the details of your day. Let them feel included in who you are and an understanding for your day, and then ask them the same.
Yeah, and I think one of the last ones we want to touch on is to practice empathy, right? Because especially during conflicts, it's important to actually understand and share in the partner's feelings, to be able to get into that place like, okay, this is what they're feeling. Or you have to take yourself outside of yourself to truly feel what someone else is feeling, and that all comes back to just having empathy. And the last concept we wanted to just touch on is in the creating a happy relationship is what they call the magic trio. And with these three things, they've shown that having these three things within a relationship will show longevity of a relationship. And the first one is there needs to be some sort of commitment, and that's basically just a mutual understanding of like the relationship, how it's going to be, like that the partners are committed to each other, and that you have the best outcomes in mind for each other, and it's not just like a one-sided thing. So some sort of commitment needs to be there, and that commitment isn't just marriage, right? It's like a commitment to each other of some sort. So there needs to be trust, because trust is going to lead to intimacy, right? When you have trust with your partner, then there's intimacy. If you have distrust, well, that's going to lead to loneliness, because if one partner is distrustful, that other partner is going to feel lonely because they're not going to be able to connect. And actually, loneliness is actually the greatest marker for cheating. It's not that they're distrustful, it's that loneliness because of distrust, right? So it's actually like it's like a kind of one of those multifaceted things, because if they feel lonely, the partner will maybe search out, or when they find something else, like they might create emotional cheating even, right? So that's really actually what the marker is for something like cheating, interestingly enough. And the last of the happy trio, so commitment, trust, and the last part is calm. Being able to listen, have empathy, being able to remain calm when your partner is having some sort of issue will lead to more active listening and better traits. So that ability is really to cultivate that state of calm is like really, really important, because if you're flooded, well, you get into this attack and defend mode, right? That's the same thing we always talk about, getting triggered. You have your basic fight flight response show up, And that's basically you feel overwhelmed and you can't maintain calm, which is going to just lead to some sort of lashing out. And so cultivating that, like, that's something that you very much cultivate within yourself. That's your kind of personal resilience. That's mindfulness, what we're always talking about here. So if you're feeling a negative emotion, you just fly off the handle each time, well, it's going to lead to a broken relationship and hurt feelings and you saying things that you just can't take back. So the ability to remain calm and kind of cultivate that personality of mindfulness or mindfulness practice is really just extremely important. And the biggest nonverbal cue that you can give to your partner in any sort of interaction is to turn towards them. And this in the world of cell phones has become kind of like it's easy to forget this one. But just nonverbally, when we're upset with someone, we turn away from them. And when we're listening and we care, we turn towards them and we give them that sort of thing. So in any sort of conflict, if you're turned away, you're closed off to them. And if you're just to turn towards, that is a nonverbal cue to be like, I'm here, I'm there, and I'm going, I'm listening. It's really interesting because they found that they're like, in any sort of conflict, turn towards your partner, and that's already going to start creating more of a connection because you're opening up yourself to them. So there we go. Those are the communication rules.
Yes, and so much is nonverbal. I hope those things were picked up on today, because the nonverbal things we do, conscious or unconscious, they're huge and they speak volumes. So just bringing your awareness to those, and then we want to encourage you for something that you can actively do, something you can go home and do today and hopefully every day, is simply take 4 minutes and commit to your partner and your relationships. People, like businesses, do this at work with their employees. It's important in every type of relationship. But we were talking about having routines, times to schedule in and connect with your partner. So if you agreed for 4 minutes that you would just sit down alone, look at each other in the eyes, and take turns, and each person just for 2 minutes share things that they love about their partner, and then switch and let the other person do it. And it's completely uninterrupted and just going with the flow. And just doing this for 2 minutes each on a daily basis will get you in a habit of focusing more on the positive and not on the negative. It's so easy to mention and focus on what was wrong or didn't go right, or, those critiques and criticisms. But what if we could shift that very easily by just taking 4 minutes a day to do this with your partner and tell them something that you love about them, all the things you love about them? Then all of a sudden the intention changes and you start looking for the positive things in the relationship. So if you're looking for a quick shift, commit to those 4 minutes if you can. We invite you to try it out and see how it goes for you.
Yes. Well, I think that's our show for today. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope that you learned a lot and that you're able to take these and really use them. So remember, commitment, trust, calm, and then being able to have 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. There you go. That's today's lesson in a nutshell. 5-to-1, and trust, commitment, and what am I missing? Calm. Trust, commitment, and calm. So there we go. The holy trinity of happiness, and stay away from the 4 horsemen of the unhappiness. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Earl Weiss, and this is Julie Tunador, and we bring you guys fun stuff to help you better your life. Mindful Morning Minutes. We bring mindfulness to your daily routine, and please join us. Please share and like with your friends, and if you found something useful, join us on one of our courses, or just invite your friends and keep coming back, because we like seeing you. We like having you. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.